Gonzaga will host the Creighton Blue Jays in another elite early season test for Mark Few's club.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Friday and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances by using code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com, where you'll get 50% off your first year. Well, folks, Andrew Nembhard remains elite in the NBA playoffs with a huge performance in Game 1 for the Indiana Pacers. We're going to talk about that, the landing spot for Adam Morrison's daughter, Addison. She has made a commitment out of high school. We're going to talk about that to close out the show. But first, there is a new game on Gonzaga's non-conference slate for the upcoming 25-26 college basketball season. According to John Rothstein of CBS Sports, Gonzaga will host Creighton, the Blue Jays, out of the Big East Conference this upcoming season. The date is November 11th for this game, again, according to Rothstein, with a return game next year in Omaha. And before we get any further into this, I will say that this game has not been officially released by Gonzaga or Creighton, but that's not particularly surprising. Gonzaga is usually one of the very last teams in college basketball to reveal their non-conference schedule. So I think this is as confirmed as a game is going to be, at least until that final schedule comes out. But one of the things in Rothstein's language about this post, and it may have just been how he wrote it, it may not mean anything, but it's listed as a home and home, and it says that the game this year will be in Spokane and that the game next year will be in Omaha. Gonzaga plays in Spokane, Creighton plays in Omaha, so certainly if it is a true home and home series, that would be true, but I do wonder if without the language of this game specifically being listed as being at the McCarthy Athletic Center or at the Chi Health Center in Omaha, which is where the Blue Jays play, if it's going to be a true home and home or if it's going to be one of those pseudo home and homes where Gonzaga plays at the Spokane Arena as opposed to playing at the actual kennel. Now, doing a little bit of digging for starters, Gonzaga is scheduled right now to play Oklahoma on November 8th at the Spokane Arena. I don't think that the Zags would play at the arena on the 8th of November and then 3 days later on the 11th of November and have both those games be at the Spokane Arena. That seems very, very unlikely to me. To the biggest basketball arena in the city of Omaha by a pretty considerable amount is where the Creighton Blue Jays play. So to me, this game seems very, very likely to end up being a legitimate true home and home where they're actually playing at each other's home arenas as opposed to playing close to those home arenas, which is what we have seen all too often in the recent years for Gonzaga, where teams will play at the arena or they'll have these series like they had with UConn or Alabama where they play in Seattle as opposed to playing at the actual home floor. So this is a nice change if this game does in fact happen at the McCarthy Athletic Center. Would be one of the more premier non-conference games to happen at the kennel in a while from a non-con perspective. So that would be some good news for Gonzaga if this were to happen. A couple other notes here. This is a game that will eliminate one of the potential opponents that Gonzaga could play in the Players Era Festival. As a reminder, that is Gonzaga's MTE or multi-team event for this year over Thanksgiving week. Gonzaga will be in Las Vegas as part of this event, which pays $1 million for every participating team in NIL funds. There's a bunch of phenomenal teams in this event. Gonzaga's specific matchups, as well as the specific dates and times of those games, are to be determined. And as long as Gonzaga keeps scheduling non-conference opponents that happen to also be in that tournament, it's going to continue to make it a little bit more difficult to schedule it out right now. We'll talk more about the rest of Gonzaga's non-conference schedule later in the show, but Gonzaga has matchups scheduled this year against both Baylor and Creighton, which are two of the other teams that are in that event. Gonzaga is 3-0 against Creighton in the Mark Few era. I found this quite funny when I was doing my research here. The Gonzaga website has their record against a ton of opponents listed if you type in like Gonzaga versus Creighton history or whatever team it typically pops up. But a lot of times Gonzaga's history is in the Mark Few era. It goes back to 1999. A lot of other team sites, when they have their history against teams, tend to go back a little farther than that. So if you go to Creighton's website right now, unless it's been changed, Creighton's website says Gonzaga, they're 6-5 all time against Gonzaga. Gonzaga's website says they're 3-0 all time against Creighton, because that is how far back the website goes. The reality is, of course, that Creighton is 6-5 against Gonzaga all time, but those first 8 matchups all happened between 1947 and 1977, where Creighton went 6-2 in those 8 games, including a 1947 matchup, by the way, where the final score was 32-29. But since Mark Few took over as the head coach in 1999, these teams have played each other 3 times. 2 of them were part of a home-and-home series in the 2017 and 2018 seasons. Gonzaga won both those games. The first was a win on December 1st, 2017, the Zags at the Kennel. That is an important detail. It was a home-and-home series that was truly a home-and-home series. Gonzaga won that one 91-74. And then the next year, literally exactly 1 year later, on December 1st, 2018, these two teams played each other at Creighton's home arena, and Gonzaga won that one 103-92. And then, of course, these two teams met up another time in the 2021 NCAA tournament when Gonzaga was a 1 seed taking on the 5th seeded Creighton Blue Jays. Gonzaga blew them out of the water. 83-65 was the final score of that one. That was, of course, the year Gonzaga went all the way to the national championship against Baylor and lost. Interestingly enough, Gonzaga has games scheduled against Oklahoma, UCLA, Baylor, and Creighton this year. 4 of the 6 teams that they played in the 2021 NCAA tournament. Just need to add Norfolk State and USC to round out the schedule and get all 6 of them on the docket for the upcoming 25-26 season. Of course, there is more to the history between Gonzaga and Creighton than that home-and-home series, that NCAA tournament matchup. Of course, the most notable recent history between these two programs would be Gonzaga point guard Ryan Nembhard, who, of course, spent the first 2 years of his college basketball career at Creighton playing for Coach Greg McDermott, led them to a pair of NCAA tournaments, led them to a Elite 8 run back in his second season, his sophomore year with the Blue Jays. He then, very surprisingly, entered the transfer portal out of Creighton. Most thought he was going to go to Arizona to play for Tommy Lloyd. He ends up coming to Gonzaga. Of course, that's tremendous amount of history with his most recent season, 5th all-time in single-season assists in college basketball history under the current records. Tremendous stuff from Ryan, but not a surprise to see this matchup wait until Ryan is officially out the door and going to the NBA, or at least the professional ranks, before they decided to set up another matchup between these two teams. If you listen to this show, if you're a longtime listener, every time we talk about ideal matchups, one of the mailbag questions I get very regularly: who would your dream schedule? Who do you want to see Gonzaga play? Almost every time Creighton is a team that I mention, I was like, I'd like to see Gonzaga regularly playing Creighton in the regular season as a non-conference matchup. And so I'm very happy to see this game end up on the calendar. Not the only, by the way, history between Gonzaga and Creighton. Grant Gibbs spent 1 season at Gonzaga back in 2009-2010, played about 9 minutes per game, hit the transfer portal, ended up at Creighton, spent 3 years with the Blue Jays, is 4th in program history in assists. So 2 times now these programs have shared point guards who've gone on to have very successful careers at their second stop. Creighton 25-11 last year, 15-5 in the Big East, earned a 9 seed, where they won their first round game against number 8 seeded Louisville before losing to number 1 seeded Auburn in the second game. So a fairly similar trajectory to Gonzaga's season last year. Very new look roster for them, also similar to Gonzaga, as they lose Ryan Kalkbrenner, Stephen Ashworth, and Jamia Neal, 3 of their best players and starters, to graduation. They also lose transfer Pop Isaacs to the portal. He ends up going to Houston. They have a pretty solid transfer portal class coming in, pair of additions from Iowa, including Owen Freeman, who was one of the first known targets for Gonzaga in the transfer portal, a 6'10" big man who ultimately the Zags did not need, as they got both Graham Ike and Braden Huff back in the mix. They also add Freeman's teammate Josh Dix from Iowa, as well as Charlotte point guard Nick Graves and Howard combo guard Blake Harper, who should be a really nice piece for Coach McDermott's Blue Jays team next year. Well, folks, we're going to take a full look at Gonzaga's non-conference slate, who else we expect might be added to the schedule before it's all said and done. All that and more coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, you ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Because between dining out, online shopping, and just general entertainment costs, it's pretty easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. And Monarch Money isn't just another budgeting app, it is a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan your long-term goals. And for me and my family, we love having a place to manage our money, being on the same page where it comes to our finances. And thankfully with Monarch Money, it's easier than ever. You can track your shared and personal accounts, set your goals, and stay on the same page without all the added stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're still talking about Gonzaga's non-conference schedule for the upcoming 2025-26 season as games continue to trickle in, as they often do. Again, for folks who are regularly following Gonzaga's non-conference schedule throughout the offseason, it is a bit of a slog as it comes together very slowly but surely. Again, I think there are places that track everybody's non-conference schedule in college basketball, and regularly Gonzaga is legitimately one of, if not the very last team to reveal the entirety of their non-conference schedule. I don't know if they're just tinkering to the last minute. I don't know if they just think it's fun to wait a little bit longer. For reference, Purdue and Iowa State, for example, already have released their non-conference schedule. We know very little about Gonzaga's non-conference schedule at this point in the offseason. We will get rumblings and rumors and trickling bits of information over the next couple of weeks, potentially a couple of months, until this thing is finalized. But here we're going to talk about what we do know. The games that we know, the dates that we know, the venues that we know, and then some speculation. What do we not know? What do we think might happen? How might this thing shake out? Here's what we do know on Gonzaga's schedule. There are 4 games where we know the date and the location and, of course, the opponent of those games, or at least it has been reported. Again, we don't really know, quote unquote, until Gonzaga's schedule comes out. But what we have heard is Gonzaga will play Oklahoma at the Spokane Arena on November 8th. That was reported by John Rothstein about 2 weeks ago. And then now, 3 days later, Gonzaga will also host Creighton. And again, we expect that this game will be at the McCarthy Athletic Center, a true home game for Gonzaga, with the return game being in Omaha next year. We expect that there will be another matchup in this Oklahoma-Gonzaga series as well. Although, again, that has not been finalized necessarily. The other 2 games that we know, Gonzaga will play Kentucky on December 5th. In Nashville at the Bridgestone Arena. That is part of a 6-year series agreed to between Gonzaga's coach Mark Few and then Kentucky coach John Calipari. Gonzaga is now 2-1 in that series. They won the first 2 games against Coach Cal's team, which were at the arena, and then at Rupp Arena, where Kentucky plays. And then the third game was this past year at the Climate Pledge Arena in Seattle, and Mark Pope got the W, even though Gonzaga had an 18-point second half lead, a devastating loss for the Zags last year. This will be the 4th game in the series and a neutral site that benefits Kentucky, being in Nashville. Then there will be 2 more games, one at Rupp Arena and one finally at the McCarthy Athletic Center to close out that series. 8 days after Gonzaga plays Kentucky, they will play UCLA December 13th. This game will be at the Climate Pledge Arena, the battle in Seattle for Gonzaga this year. This is a return game when Gonzaga played UCLA last year at the Intuit Dome, the new home of the Los Angeles Clippers. And then we know a couple other games, but we don't know dates for these games. We know Gonzaga will play Baylor as part of a series agreed to last year, a 3-year series. Gonzaga played Baylor last year at the Spokane Arena, so this game will either be a true neutral, possibly Las Vegas or the Sanford Pentagon or somewhere like that, or it'll be a game much closer to Waco, where Baylor plays, potentially somewhere in Texas. And then there will be a third game that will be kind of the opposite of that, either a close game to Baylor or a true neutral game the following year. And then Gonzaga will have a road game against Arizona State, part of a 2-year home and home series where Gonzaga hosted the Sun Devils this past year in Spokane. Will now play them in Tempe this upcoming year. So those are the games that we know with the dates and the information that we have at this point. We also know Gonzaga will, of course, be part of the Players Era NIL Festival, as we mentioned previously. That is the big time NIL event where each team gets $1 million in NIL funds for their team to use. The winning team of the event will get an additional $1 million. At least that's how it worked last year. As far as I can tell from looking at their website, that is the plan again for this upcoming year. There is a litany of elite college basketball programs, some of the best of the very best, set up to be in this event this year. Gonzaga, of course, among them. They will get 3 games. It has not been determined who they will play. And again, it might take a while to determine that, especially if teams are going to start scheduling games against each other, as the people who put together the schedule want to avoid Gonzaga getting any potential matchup with Baylor or Creighton at this point, because they're both already slated to play them at a different time in the non-conference. They also have to avoid intra-conference matchups as much as possible. That's not an issue for Gonzaga specifically, but it is an issue for many of the other teams in this event. Here's a list of the teams that are scheduled to be a part of the Players Era Festival this year: Alabama, Auburn, Baylor, Creighton, Houston, Iowa State, Kansas, Michigan, Notre Dame, Oregon, Rutgers, San Diego State, St. Joe's, St. John's, Syracuse, Tennessee, and UNLV. So again, Baylor and Creighton not going to be scheduled against Gonzaga. Anybody else would be fair game. Could be fun to play San Diego State. Kind of get ready, another matchup. They've played 2 years in a row. This would be the 3rd year. And then going forward, as they would join the Pac-12 after that, obviously Houston, a rematch with them. Kansas is always fun. Alabama and Auburn are fantastic. Oregon is a team they haven't played in a very long time. There's a lot of great matchups that could end up happening. Basically, as long as they don't somehow get like St. Joe's, Syracuse, and UNLV, which would not make any sense. I think that Gonzaga is going to be in real good shape with the matchups that come out of that event. That's what we know at this point. A couple other things that we know. We don't know, like we're not 100%, but that we kind of know. Most of the rest of Gonzaga's non-conference schedule is probably going to be by-game type opponents, with Kentucky, UCLA, Baylor, Oklahoma, Creighton, and the NIL Feast Week tournament already on the schedule. I wouldn't expect a whole lot more marquee non-conference opponents. Typically, Gonzaga will play 3 to 4 like really marquee games. Then they'll have their Feast Week event, and then they'll have some kind of mid-tier non-conference opponents, and then they'll have the bye games, the teams that were outside the top 250 at Ken Pom last year, the UMass Lowells, the Long Beach State, Idaho, Montana State, whomever it may be, teams of that ilk. I expect that's the majority of what we have left. Creighton was probably the last like really big name team. Oklahoma's a kind of it's a marquee-ish opponent in the SEC. They're not great necessarily, but a good type of opponent. Oklahoma and Arizona State are kind of maybe a tick below that marquee level, but then you have Baylor, UCLA, Kentucky, Creighton, all in that marquee level. And then I think with the Players Era Festival being so obviously loaded with marquee talent, I would be surprised if we saw any super great opponent added to the schedule. The one I'm still keeping an eye on is Washington. Washington and Gonzaga were scheduled to play each other last year in Spokane as part of a series, but because Washington replaced Mike Hopkins with new coach Danny Sprinkle, there was a clause in the agreement they had that a new coach can basically waive off this scheduling agreement, and that is what Danny Sprinkle did. They said, no, thank you. We do not want to play you in Spokane this year. We're going to pass on this. That doesn't mean that they're not obligated to bring it back necessarily. I think if they were to reschedule a series, that it would start in Spokane since that's where it was supposed to be. And I imagine Gonzaga would want to make sure that that game happened in Spokane the next time that it does happen. But I don't know if that's something that's going to end up happening this year or not. It's certainly at least an opponent to keep an eye on if you're looking for more high major opponents that Gonzaga could end up playing. But again, outside of that, I would expect it to be the kind of games we're used to seeing. Like I said, Long Beach State, Idaho State, North Florida, the types of teams we've seen Gonzaga play time and time again as they need to just fill out their schedule. We talked about this a little bit last year, but Gonzaga's schedule last year was more competitive, even with those kind of mid-tier teams like Bucknell was on the schedule last year, UMass Lowell on the schedule last year. They were teams that had a fair amount of success the previous season in their conference. So I think we are seeing Gonzaga try to not just load it up with like really, really bad teams or like, SWAC teams like Alcorn State who tend to finish in the 330s, 340s at Ken Palm. They played a little bit more competitive schedule last year. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Zags try to do that again and add teams that are still mid-major teams, still in smaller conferences that tend to be one-bid leagues, but that maybe have a better chance of actually making some noise in the NCAA tournament. Think of it this way. Instead of playing a bunch of maybe 16 seeds, maybe Gonzaga will play a bunch of maybe 13 seeds. Like that's the difference from Gonzaga's non-conference schedule last year compared to previous years. So as we see the schedule fill up, it'll be interesting to see what those opponents look like for the Zags heading into the 25-26 season. Well, folks, Andrew Nembhard had a big play and then another big play and then another big play in Indiana's Game 1 victory over the New York Knicks. We're going to break that down, plus an update on a Gonzaga legend's daughter who has made her college basketball commitment. We'll get to that to close out the show in just a second. All right, folks, closing out the show. We are moving away from talking about Gonzaga's schedule, which we talked about with their addition of Creighton to the non-conference slate. Instead, we're going to talk about some NBA Zags as the Western Conference and Eastern Conference finals are getting underway. And then we're also going to talk about Adam Morrison's daughter, Addison Wells Morrison, who has made her college basketball commitment. We'll start with Andrew Nembhard, though. What an incredible performance he had in Game 1 between the Indiana Pacers and the New York Knicks of the Eastern Conference Finals. It's a renewed rivalry between these two teams, and boy, did it get off to an excellent start in Game 1. The New York Knicks had a 14-point lead with 2 minutes and 45 seconds to go in the fourth quarter. No team has ever come back from 14 down with 2:45 or less to go in a game until the Pacers did that on Wednesday evening. Andrew Nembhard had 7 of his 15 points in the overtime period that Indiana was able to force late in that game. He had a clutch 3 in the final minutes of regulation to send that thing to overtime. He then had a backdoor cut lay-in with 16 seconds left in overtime. It was a beautiful play if you haven't seen it. New York was so focused on Tyrese Halliburton, and for good reason. He hung 35 on them in this game, but Josh Hart kind of got lost or got caught staring at the basketball. Andrew Nembhard, beautiful backdoor cut, gets an open pass from Halliburton, lays it in, gives them a 1-point lead with 16 seconds to go. But that's not it, because then on the next defensive possession, Andrew Nembhard was defending Jalen Brunson, New York's star player, the guy that wanted the ball in his hands to try to get up a shot, and Nembhard just smothered him. He proved why he earned that Eastern Conference Defensive Player of the Month award back in January, smothered Jalen Brunson, forced an off-balance shot, led to a W for the Pacers. Andrew Nembhard was a crucial, important part of that W for the Pacers in Game 1. Game 2 is on Friday at 5 p.m. Pacific time in New York. Nembhard has continued to be a tremendous piece of this team's playoff picture. He's been great in the regular season, but in the last 2 years in particular, his performance has ticked up dramatically when the playoffs rolled around. He is getting himself a reputation for being an absolute gamer in those clutch situations, and I can't imagine Indiana fans could be any happier with the way he has played for this team as of late. Well, I'm recording this right now during Game 2 of the Western Conference Finals between the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Minnesota Timberwolves, so I will just give you the update on Game 1, which the Thunder won 114-88. In that one, Chet Holmgren looked great. 15 points, 7 boards, 3 assists, 2 blocks, and a steal for him. He was a very efficient 6 of 9 from the field. That included knocking down his only 3-point attempt. Chet doing it all against a very good Minnesota team anchored by defensive stalwart Rudy Gobert. For Chet to be able to have this kind of performance, Rudy Gobert also only had 2 points in Game 1. Granted, Gobert's not much of a scorer, regardless of who is defending him, but still great to see Chet have a highly efficient offensive night while doing good stuff on the defensive end of the floor as Oklahoma City looks to advance to the NBA Finals, where perhaps they will face off against Indiana. It could be a really fun series between Chet and Andrew, two teammates for a season in Spokane with Gonzaga, now potentially getting the chance to face off against each other. There's still a lot of game left for these two squads, but there's a real chance they end up facing each other for a national champ or for a NBA Finals trophy. And then we're going to close out the show talking about an update for the Morrison family. For those of you who missed this, Addison Wells Morrison is a junior at Meade High School, the same high school that her father, Adam Morrison, starred at before, of course, committing to Gonzaga. And then we know the story from there. Was a phenomenal player for 2 years, broke out even more as a junior, was the Player of the Year Wooden Award winner, 28 points per game. The battles all season long between him and J.J. Redick of Duke was one of the best stories in college basketball in the last 20 years. And I hate that it's barely counts as being in the last 20 years, but it is within the last 20 years. Morrison, of course, still with Gonzaga now as a play-by-play broadcaster for the Gonzaga radio network. And his daughter has committed to join the Idaho Vandals in the Big Sky Conference in Moscow, Idaho. She will go play for them, not this upcoming season, but the following season. She's still got her senior year at Meade High School to go before she commits to Idaho. And Idaho, by the way, very solid women's basketball program under their new coach who took over last year, kind of turned that program around. They have a top 40 transfer portal class in all of college basketball joining them this year, which for a program in Idaho is tremendous to have that level of success in the portal. So they're building something big time with the Lady Vandals in Idaho, and for Wells Morrison to be joining them. She's been phenomenal at Meade High School, helped them to the playoffs the last 3 years, the state playoffs. So sad to not see her at Gonzaga. Obviously, that would be a fun story to have the younger Morrison playing for Coach Lisa Fortier and the women's basketball team. I don't know whether she didn't want to follow in her dad's footsteps, whether she was not recruited by Gonzaga, whether there's extenuating circumstances outside of that that have pushed her to go somewhere else. But certainly it would be fun, but she's staying local. It's still going to be fun to be able to track her career at Idaho, playing in the Big Sky Conference and kind of see what they're able to do. As somebody who follows the news stations in the Spokane area, they frequently report on what's going on at Idaho and Idaho State anyway. So we'll get some updates on how Morrison's doing when she starts there again. Not this upcoming season, but the following year. And I mean, folks, it's the transfer portal era. Just because Wells Morrison's not committing to Gonzaga right now doesn't mean that she won't end up playing for Gonzaga at some point if that's something that she wants to do and something where she plays well enough to earn that from Coach Fortier and their staff. That's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. I hope you all have a fantastic, safe, healthy, and fun Memorial Day weekend. I will have a show for you either on Monday or Tuesday morning, but it'll be late as I'm going to be traveling back from a vacation on Monday. So enjoy the holiday. May not get a show from me until a little later next week, but we'll still have your full slate of shows as we continue to talk about the transfer portal, Gonzaga's pursuit of a handful of European players to fill out their roster, keep you up to date on Ryan Nembhard's workouts as he prepares for the NBA draft, that and much more coming your way next week on Locked On Zags. Once again, have a safe and healthy and happy holiday. And of course, as always, go Zags.